All you, Ron.
All right. Folks, welcome to our panel on Holler. I've got a group of esteemed guests, and I am also here. This is Ron Blessing. We've got Tracy Sizemore.
Hello.
We've got David Anderson.
Afternoon, everybody.
We've got the Savage Bull, Chris Landauer. And of course, we have the man of the hour, the creator of Holler, Mr. Tim Earley.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome to the panel, folks. I'm going to get right into the Q&A, and I'm going to ask some questions. You've got the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the window here to let you ask yours. We've already got a question in there. We're going to do our best to field each and every one that we can. And let's start with you, Tim. Where'd this thing come from?
Well, Ron, I'm from Western North Carolina originally. I grew up in a little town called Sandy Mush. My grandparents spoke a very rich Appalachian dialect. And one day when I was about 6 years old, I figured out that we did not talk like the people talked on the television. And that sort of changed my life forever. I got really interested in language. I just sort of became a sponge for words. That led to me becoming a poet and then later on a professor, studying Appalachian history, culture, literature. When I was around 9 years old, I discovered Dungeons and Dragons. I played a lot of AD&D between the ages of 9 and 14, sort of drifted away when I started writing and trying to be a scholar poet. And about 5 years ago, I started playing again. And then I was lucky to stumble into Genghis Khan, Savage Saturday Night. I think it was the last Savage Saturday Night that the Rocky Mountain Savages organized there. And it was just teeming with games and energy and fun. And I got into a Flash Gordon game with Scott Woodard and Daryl Hayhurst, fell in love with the system. And then I started thinking about, how I might make my own game, and the Appalachian material seemed like a perfect fit given my background.
Very cool. And tell us exactly, what Holler is, what it's intended to be, what people kind of have to look forward to in terms of setting.
I've been calling it a dark fantasy folk horror hybrid, and we can talk about what folk horror is, at some point if y'all want to. But it's set in sort of an alternate version of Appalachia, a Gothic version of Appalachia, roughly 1930s Depression era, but with room for cool anachronisms. If it's fun, it can slip into the setting. But if it's part of the larger Appalachian mythos and imaginative universe, the game sort of revolves around labor conflict. The region has a history of intense labor conflict. The Battle of Blair Mountain in 1921, the largest armed engagement on U.S. soil after the Civil War, Bloody Harlan, textile strikes, the Matewan incident. And so we have these guys, the big boys, who are these industrial operators who have sealed the holler off from the rest of the world. There's an initiating cataclysmic event that causes this to happen. And they come in to put the people to work and extract the riches. That's sort of the narrative baseline of this labor conflict. I also pull very heavily on Appalachian folklore and culture. And if you know anything about Appalachia, it's a storytelling culture. There's tall tales, there's ghost stories, there's a fascination in modern day with cryptids. I work that in there. So we have the labor conflict, we have Appalachian folklore, we have dealing with sort of environmental and ecological collapse from things like mountaintop removal. And the industrial operators are called the big boys. And it's sort of a term among the Holler residents. Some people use it with affection because they're glad to have a job in the coal mines or the textile mills. Others use it with derision. What are them big boys up to now, right? So labor conflict, Appalachian folklore, demonic infestation are sort of the three major tenets of the game.
Very cool. So Tracy, you are the developer working with Tim directly to get to to print, as it were.
Right.
Tell the world a little bit about the world, all these people in the world that are here for our panel. Tell folks exactly what you're doing, what your process is going to be with this.
So I've been sort of brought on by Shane to help develop Holler, and what that means is I'm taking what Tim wrote and I'm sort of going through it, and I'm trying to sort of help him match it up with Savage Worlds rules and sort of put it in the Savage Worlds framework, like in an RPG framework, specifically for Savage Worlds. And but first and foremost is to sort of realize Tim's vision in that context. And so it's more than that. Also, of course, I'm helping to refine the rules parts of it, like with edges and hindrances and all that stuff. And and Tim has written quite a few words, so we have a lot of extra stuff that may end up being used in some other way, but some stuff has to be sort of massaged down. So I mean, he's just prolific and written some amazing things. It's just one great thing after another, and so it's a tough job to go through and it's like decide which babies we want to kill, right? But that's part of the job. And besides that is to bring this to Kickstarter and to work with Simon to get production done for all those goodies that we talked about, or that Shane talked about yesterday in the PEG panel. And so that's my role, is to sort of help bring Tim's vision to fruition is my job. I think you're muted, Ron.
Of course I am. That's the new catchphrase of 2020.
Yes.
You're muted. Yeah, you're muted.
Yeah.
So, David, this one's for you. You're one of the I'd call an early adopter people that are not Tim who run Holler.
Okay.
So tell me what drew you into getting excited and wanting to run this game.
Well, my attraction to Holler started long before I actually met Tim. I met Tim at Genghis this past year. We played a bunch of games together, and I instantly liked the guy. But actually, Mr. Landauer had Tim on his podcast, and he had Tim read kind of that unbelievable, I'm sure it's going to end up on the back cover or something, that unbelievable description of what Holler was. And he read it in that just unbelievable little twang he's got to his voice. And the minute I heard that, I was like, I became a very important gamer at Genghis just so I could get in on Tim's games and Karl Kiesler's games. So Tim and I hit it off pretty well, and he showed me some of the stuff that he had for Holler, and it's just unbelievable what's coming out with this game. It's labor conflict, but you can play it as an exploratory game. You can play it as an action-adventure game, which is kind of what I'm running this afternoon. It's going to be more of an action-adventure kind of thing, but you can get deep in the weeds with the politics. I think the word I would use to describe what Tim has created is moody. It's really moody. It's just every word that he writes kind of exudes this feeling of desperation, but it's not post-apocalyptic, but it kind of is. And I think what I love about it is you just can't put it in a box. So much like Tim himself, you just can't. And there's the possibilities with it are just endless.
That's great. So we have just been joined by the lovely and talented Jessica Rogers.
Hey, sorry my game ran just a little bit late, but it was like a really good game, so we were just trying to wrap it up really quick. It was Karl Kiesler's Molly Stitch game.
Oh, excellent.
Nice.
Well, I will say that other than family and real life, I think gaming is one of the best excuses to be late for a panel. So there you go. So Jess, what's your part in all this Holler thing?
Right now I'm playtesting on Sundays with Tim and Tracy and Daryl, and I think we're going to be joined by some of Tim's buddies soon. And then if they need me, I'll be helping with like editing and layout and things like that. But that'll come later. So right now I'm just mainly playtesting, and then if they need me, I'll step in and just help a little bit.
Awesome. Well, you've got a great touch with the layouts and stuff, so
It's my favorite.
I am looking forward to seeing what you can do if you get in that final stage. Very cool. So, Chris, you're another Holler GM. What's your take on GMing Holler?
I'm scared. I can't even say the word. I got to do this tomorrow, and I've been lucky enough to know Tim. Obviously, he was in Denver for a good number of years, and I played kind of one of the years he was running it for a Sunday group we had that kind of hit up the game lounge off Colfax. And you got to shout out to these places because they're dying now, right? It's really tough.
Oh,
but
yeah.
during the before times, the long ago, when we actually got the game together, Tim ran it, and the first adventure was just it was so thematic, it was so deep, it was definitely a different level. So that's kind of a step your game up as a game. I mean, I get to run Holler that way. You can run it like a typical adventure kind of stuff. But I mean, there is that layer if you want to go there, that there's just more to delve into. And so tomorrow, evening, I think I'm going to be running the Sin Eaters, and Tim's got this great aspect in the game where I don't know if the name, but there's kind of a veil around the Holler where most of the residents don't remember being outside of their little few square miles. And the out world that is, it's a thing of the past, and the big boys can come in and out, but the regular residents can't. And to me, that kind of spoke to purgatory. And is it like Lost, where you're on this little island and you don't know if you're alive or dead, and are you atoning for sins? And what would people in that world think of being trapped off and losing their memory of their previous life? And so I kind of like the idea that there might be a little bit of not a cult, but kind of a feeling of like maybe we have to atone for something. Maybe there's something we can do to get out of this, and just kind of looking at how real world religions took that on, kind of weave that in. And there's actually some interesting Welsh culture that did work its way into Appalachia that I'm touching on with the Sin Eaters game. So hopefully it's good, and if it's really good, maybe Tim will let me publish it and Tracey will edit it so it's nice. But if it's this end, I'll edit this video and deny everything. So
Fair enough. The power of editing. So let's start hitting these questions up. And the first one is from Jim Myers. What kind of archetypes are we going to see in Holler?
So the archetypes are a range of everyday folks who some of them have worked for the big boys. The archetypes focus on people who live outside the company system in some way or another. They've rejected it. They're refugees. They've always lived far back in the hills and haven't been a part of it. They were a part of it and have gotten out of it. Miners, moonshiners, mill hands, mountain men. I'm doing all the M's now. We have seers. One of my favorite archetypes is a granny woman. When she's played in games, just a really interesting character. Traditionally in Appalachian culture, granny women were midwives, healers, sometimes faith healers. Sometimes there was a bit of suspicion about the line between granny woman and witch, which can be sort of fun to play with as well. One of my favorites that Jess is playing is the Gouger. There's this history of something called rough and tumble fighting. It took place in a lot of rural areas in America, and this was more in the late 19th century. But it was like an early form of unsanctioned MMA fighting. It was just brutal. It has roots in sort of bare-knuckled boxing back in Ireland. And, folks would settle disputes this way. And sort of the most impressive thing you could do as a fighter was gouge out someone else's eye. Where gouging fights come from. So Minnie May is like a 5-foot-tall, 110-pound gouger, just as fierce and as tough as nails. So I like that archetype. There's holy rollers, hell raisers, and then there's sort of like archetypes associated with families, like an aggrieved mother, or a family man, or a curious youth, to sort of focus on the kin bonds and the importance of family in the larger culture.
Very cool. And I guess a follow-up that you're probably going to want to answer as well. Is there going to be a plot point for this?
There is going to be a plot point. It's written. It's going to need to be polished and shaped a little bit. I think the plot point right now in its raw, untutored state is like 28,000 words. It will be shrinking and becoming more focused, but it's there. The whole arc is there. I try to do a lot of different kinds of adventures in the plot point. One of the things that David was talking about, and I'm glad that he feels this way about it, is that I was trying to create a game that had a lot of different ways you could play it and a tonal dial that you could turn up and down pretty easily. I come from like a literary background. I read Faulkner, O'Connor, McCarthy. I've spent my life doing that. I love B movies. I love pulp. I love camp, right? And sort of bringing those two sensibilities together where you can have a game where it's very campy and pulpy and outrageous and one crazy thing is happening after another and then it can turn on a dime and things can get serious. I wanted it to have that sort of tonal variance and for GMs to be able to turn that dial in whichever direction they wanted.
Very cool. And Tyler says, I enjoyed playing the Granny Woman last night. What steps did you take to balance the arcane background? She feels like a great support character.
There's a big sort of power divide in the Holler between the big boys and the player characters. There's a technological divide. There's a weaponry divide. There's a general resource divide. The big boys and their minions, they have Tommy guns, right? They have automatic weapons. They have lots of firepower. They have access to weird science and pretty much any power you could imagine in the weird science range. The Holler folks themselves, you're using Pawpaw's hunting rifle passed down from 2 generations if it has not been confiscated. You might be picking up a rock. You might be picking up a tire tool, right? So, and in terms of the arcane backgrounds, one of the decisions that we made early on, and I was talking with Shane about this a bit, is like, should these folks have offensive spells? Right now, they're mainly support spells in the arcane backgrounds. We have one that's sort of tuned to the Holy Roller character with sort of some faith-based effects. We have one that's sort of tuned to the folk magic of the Granny Woman, and they're focused on various methods of support. So that power imbalance means, you know, there's going to be a lot of support roles. There's going to be a lot of ganging up. There's going to be a lot of tests. You know, there's going to be a lot of ingenuity and resilience and sort of narrative chicanery that the characters are going to have to rely on to deal with certain situations.
All the things that Savage Worlds is kind of perfect for.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, excellent.
And then you can, you know, those weapons are there to steal ultimately too. And there's a black market that exists in the Holler that you can tap into. So you can arm yourselves over time. You can arm yourselves to the teeth, but it starts out you're at a pretty severe disadvantage.
No, absolutely. No, I get it. Very cool. And Tracy, tell me a little bit about your experience. I know you've been kind of reading through the material for the first time. What has you most excited for what you have been beginning to work on here?
Well, I feel I did not grow up in Appalachia, obviously, and I'm about as far from that as possible. But I've done my own sort of I've had my moments in having to research a lot about it and the company system and the mining system and all that stuff. Like, there's such richness there of not only horror, like real life, honest to God horror, but also of connection and people coming together and people looking out for each other. It's all there, and that's what really excites me about the setting, is to combine that kind of like meaningful connection with people, and hello, Karl Kiesler, and that terrible thing about what people do to each other, like in that horrific power imbalance that is the company store and the script system and all that stuff. That's what excites me the most. And then you add on top of that haints and all those sort of supernatural elements that are also a part of the setting, and fairies. I'm so excited to sort of explore that land where they live and what they do, and sort of see what Tim's got in mind, because it feels to me like Tim and I are really on the same wavelength a lot of times, and I'm excited to be able to have input and like reactions to that and see where that takes Tim, if anywhere, right? But man, that's what's exciting to me is that combination of pulp action and supernatural elements with real people and real connection and people who care about each other. That's where I live. That's how I game.
Very cool. And so Tyler also wants to make sure that we're aware, and maybe this would be a really good one for Tracy, that there's a horror podcast called Old Gods of Appalachia. And apparently that's a very cool resource.
Cool. I'll write that down.
Yeah, Old Gods of Appalachia. So is there a train and a train station, Tim?
There are trains. There are railroads. The big boys have instituted a railroad system, and sometimes those get blown up. Or a train can be stolen. I saw Landauer talking about the stealing of trains for joyrides. A couple of nights ago on the horror stories.
Crashing them into each other, I think we were talking about, right?
and while I have kind of both of you here too, a little bit about tropes specifically that you're going to be touching on the game. I know we spoke about specifics, but let's talk a little bit about tropes.
Well, tropes, and one of the things that I was thinking about, and if this is not answering your question, Ron, you can steer me back, but maybe it's a way into this larger discussion, was, we're dealing with a culture that's real. It's not imaginary, even if we're doing an imaginative version of it. And with the role-playing game, you're always going to be dealing with sort of iconic features of whatever setting, with archetypes, right? And something that I was concerned about initially, like, where's the line going to be between archetype, stereotype, caricature?
Yep.
Where do we feel comfortable landing on that line? Are we going to try this authentic representation of Appalachia and its people in a given time period and go for historical specificity and authenticity? Or are we going to play with that a little bit? And when I was first making the game, those can be sort of hazardous ethical waters to swim into. I thought to myself, well, do I want to try to make a game that will be inoffensive to everyone in the universe and perhaps drain some color, vigor, life, intensity out of the setting? Do I just not want to make this game because of these potential issues and then not have this really cool Appalachian universe to play in that I want to exist to play in because it speaks to me on a very fundamental level? I said, no, I don't want to do the first thing, and I don't want to do the second thing. So what I'm trying to do is engage archetypes from the culture, engage some of those tropes, approach them seriously and with sort of like heart and affection, but also feel free to have fun with them. I don't think anybody's going to confuse our depiction of a moonshiner who looks like Popcorn Sutton and just looks like the archetypal moonshiner with us trying to represent like someone working a 9-to-5, in my hometown of Forest City, North Carolina. The moonshiner has grown into this huge icon in American culture. There's a whole mythos surrounding it. So I sort of just gave myself permission to go into those tropes and archetypes in terms of characters and play with them and have fun. I don't think we're doing like hillbilly stuff, goofy hillbillies, silly hillbillies at all. I think it's much more sort of intense and grounded than that. But I want people to have fun. I don't want people to be self-conscious about adopting an accent, or, getting into a character and playing them, based on something they've seen on television in terms of an Appalachian depiction.
I think the biggest obstacle you're going to face, Tim, is in the after times when we can actually go to conventions again, is you're going to have to listen to a bunch of people trying really hard to poorly talk like you.
Right. Yeah. And I've run it at conventions. It's fun. I love to hear the attempted accents. Some of them are pretty good. And, there's lots of different dialects all throughout Appalachia. People at the northern end of the chain sound completely different than people at the southern end.
Sure.
Everybody on this panel says Appalachia. It hits my ear, and my ear sours.
It hurts,
because we say Appalachia down on the southern end, but like folks other places say Appalachia.
I say Appalachia. I say Appalachia because that's how I heard it, so that's how I say it.
Yeah.
So we have been joined by the enigmatic Karl Kiesler here. He is everywhere.
Yeah.
Let's talk. So first of all, that really cool, all those great reddish with the shadowy background stuff that you guys have been seeing around the Holler campaign since we first announced it have been thanks to Karl. I should point out that the really cool moving smoky stuff was Chris Landauer, but the static images were Karl. So Karl, tell us about. Go ahead.
For all
Chris.
of that, right? I mean, me and that YouTube video tutorial, that's some excellent stuff right there. So really, if this campaign goes well and Tim gets a movie, when he gets a movie deal, I expect to be part of the entourage. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah, I mean, the images are fine, Karl, but
thanks.
They were really brought alive by visual moving smoke.
Yeah,
from Landauer. No, but Karl, tell us about your kind of your process and how you came to. You're really going to be responsible in a lot of ways for the look of Holler. So
right.
Tell us how you got there.
Well, I met Tim years ago at a con, and we got to talking online and stuff. And he says, I have this cool setting that I'm coming out. I want you to read some stuff. So he was sending me some Holler stuff like way early on. I'm like, wow, this is pretty amazing. This is great. And I live in Florida, so I don't really know anything about the mountains and stuff. I spent summers up there when I was a kid and stuff like that. But I had to do some real research on what he was referencing and talking about, and he helped me out. He said, well, this happened back then, and so I was like way down the rabbit hole on watching documentaries and stuff like that, and checking out some videos on YouTube and things like that. And I was sending him some stuff. He goes, yeah, I seen that. That's pretty cool. I'm like, awesome. So I was really trying to immerse myself into that era, in that time period, in that area. So he was telling me about, and I was reading about the setting, and it's basically horror-driven, kind of folklore stuff. And so I thought red and black would be perfect, and I gave it. I chose the font for the logo, kind of based on the time period. I kind of it got in my head that movie There Will Be Blood. So I kind of mimicked some of the look after that. I watched that. I love that movie.
Me too.
And it's kind of in the same era, except they're oil and he's got coal up there. So
it's a lovely font. It just has the name we can't actually give on the podcast.
Yeah,
the one font with it, you have to X out the actual name.
Yeah, there's it's a weird name. I didn't name it. There's a nasty word in there, but but it's a great font. So yeah, I just wanted to give it like a grungy like look of that time period. And I know Tim and I worked. He didn't really have too much of a budget because I did like a jumpstart for him, and we were like running against the clock. And he did get some art by Rick Hershey, I think, which was amazing. But there was it still needed some more art. So Tim and I talked, and we decided on doing like stock photos, like Wiki Commons type stuff that was that anybody could use, kind of public domain is what I'm looking for. So I scrounged the internet, Wiki Commons, looking for public domains of miners and things like that. And so I really photoshopped that stuff and try to give it like a realistic look to this setting, because it's based on real people. and really harsh stuff that happened in that era. And it's you should read some stuff that really happened. I don't know what I just jumped on because I was running a game, so I don't know what you guys covered before, but there was some pretty harsh things that happened back then. And but yeah, Tim was a great guide in helping me out and in getting that realistic look, that grungy look to it. And I don't know if Pinnacle's going to change much of it. It depends on printing and all that stuff, so they might change a little bit. I'm not sure. So, but I did give him the bones of what to work for. So
awesome. Well, talking about the imagery, I have not been able to get past the concept of a gouger since we've been talking about that. But first of all, I'm going to call out my buddy Clint Black, not the country singer. He keeps threatening a black edit in the comments. And here's the thing. I'm going to tell you right now, Tim and Tracy, if Shane says, hey, Clint wants to look over your book and blah, 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 stall. Just wait until it's too close to the Kickstarter for anything Clint might want to do to actually happen. And you should be good to go. That way your book will be in one piece. I love messing with Clint.
I don't know. Clint's like actually useful. That's the problem.
I know. That's the worst part. I believe the phrase is that's the damnable truth of it all.
It is. It really is.
So are you saying that Clint does to your manuscript what Shane does when he plays in your game? Like just destroys your ego, tears it up, leaves
I
you
think that's
crying.
only your game though, Chris.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, he's never done that to me. I mean, it was fine. None of us know what you're talking about, Chris.
no.
So I'm trying really hard not to gush about your game that I played in, David, because I don't want to give away any spoilers. But Casey wants you to at least tell us a little bit about the game that you're running today.
Well, unfortunately, the game that I ran for you guys didn't even get to what I consider to be the good stuff. So I want to run it again for you and Tracy and the rest of the folks who are there, Chris, because the only thing I'm going to say about it is I saw Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and I said, I want to do that in a game, and I want to do it in Tim's setting. That's it. That's and hopefully we're going to do that. I want to get you in on it too one of these days, Karl.
I'd love to, man.
Yeah. I'm gonna jam for you one of these days, man.
I can't wait, dude.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. That's a high bar to jump over because what do we always say, Ron? I'm a pretty good
Karl
GM.
Kiesler.
I'm right. I'm no Karl Kiesler. Nope.
I can't wait till we get to a con with Karl with our plan. It's gonna be awesome.
Oh yeah.
Anyway,
we got a plan for you, Karl.
We got a plan.
Oh
Karl.
boy.
Well, we are looking at dates for 2021 for Deadwood in South Dakota. Like we had to stall this year, obviously, but
Sure.
I know most of you guys were headed up to Deadwood when we were going to do it a few weeks ago. Sadly, I got the emails like your Deadwood event is through day 2, and it's like, no, it's not. It got canceled. But yeah, no. If you guys want to do it, we'll set it up. We'll get you playing on the actual table where Wild Bill got killed, like in the little room.
Oh, that sounds great.
That'd be pretty epic. Like Tim Earley, David, Ron, everybody.
Oh yeah.
So.
Run
We'll
some
plug.
Deadwood. Run some Deadwood in Deadwood. Yeah.
There you go. So Tim, I want to. One of the things that always surprises me is the backgrounds of the people that have been involved in Savage Worlds over the years. Tell folks a little bit about where you're coming from here, and this might explain why you turned so many words into Tracy.
Right. I come from a literary background. I've been writing poetry since I was 16. I started doing it seriously by my late teens, early 20s. I went to the University of Alabama, got an MFA in creative writing there, and I've been teaching either creative writing or literature since I was 23 years old, 48 now, so a quarter century doing this. And the whole time I've been writing poetry, and most of that poetry deals with where I'm from. One of my books is called Linthead Stomp. It's about a 6-mile stretch of road in my home county. There's just 4 or 5 ex-mill villages in a row. And the textile mill industry dominated that county for 100 years. And then with NAFTA, some other changes in global trade, all those jobs went away. And those mills just sat on the hillsides, crumbling for 10, 15 years. Abandoned dye tanks. The unemployment rate hit 20%. That's the official. The real unemployment rate was much higher. And I just saw the place where I grew up, where those mills were, this was past, in the 30s and 40s, there were still mill villages, and then there was like a post-mill village era. But there were places of community where the people you worked with were like your family, and all of a sudden that disappeared, and the social problems just sort of exploded. And so I wrote like an epic poem about this 6-mile stretch of road called Linthead Stomp. Linthead is a term that people used to use derisively to refer to people who worked in textile mills because they'd get cotton lint in their hair and they'd come off their shift and have lint in their hair, called them lintheads. And so it's just been something that I've been obsessed with and sort of dedicated my life to for decades now. Reading the literature, teaching the literature, and writing my own Appalachian literature. And so I just, I just came to the writing of this game with a lot of ammo and a lot to say and a lot that I wanted to explore. And it's not a labor of love for me. It is a labor of like necessity, obsessiveness. One of the greatest regrets of my existence is that I did not record a conversation with my grandmother Harris before she passed away. I mean, she had his and her, getting tripped up, his and hern and yorn as possessive pronouns. She like a poke for a bag that she would carry, a stob for like some post that was sticking out of the ground but had no discernible reason for being there, poison for poison, deaf for deaf. And so like that language is just always in my head, on this little soundtrack, and I can go and access it at any point, and that language is tied to people and it's tied to stories. And so I came at this game with just all years of studying this and living this and writing this built up. And so that's why Tracey has such a hellacious editing job.
It's a pleasurable editing job.
There you go. So, got a couple more questions, and this one's going to put you on the spot a little bit, Tim. Savage Mommy, Chris Fox, wants to know if you'd be willing to share a poem with us.
Oh, snap, y'all. Okay, this needs to stay PG-13, right?
You did just say it was always in your head. It's always in your head, so you should just be able to pop one out. Right?
Oh, I have a lot of words. I don't memorize. I don't memorize those things.
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, let's do it. Let's find one that you can say in PG-13. Remember,
y'all
even in PG-13,
y'all talk gently amongst yourselves, and I'll try to pull one up real quick.
So Tracey, how are you planning to avoid pulling the, I don't want to say pulling the culture out, but really what's your plan to make sure that you are, I personally, as an editor myself, what's your plan to make this a pinnacle product while at the same time staying true to the language and the feel that Tim's going for?
Well, like Tim and I have already talked about a couple of things, and one thing that I found interesting, and Tim can sort of either confirm or deny this because I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that he originally wrote it a little bit grittier than it is now. And as I'm going through some of the early rules in the player creation or character creation section, I'm looking at it, I'm going, oh my gosh, this feels more Cthulhu than we probably would want for a Savage World setting. And so I talked to Tim about it. I didn't want to take it away from him, but I just like, well, this is an interesting thing. What is the intent behind this? And it became more of a Tim sort of is like as he's written it and as he's sort of gotten to know the Savage World sort of culture and life, he sort of shifted the setting a little bit more toward not all the way pulp, of course, but it's still horror, but it's also a nod toward heroism. Right, and so we're moving sort of in that direction, and then as far as that culture stuff that Tim talked about before, in terms of keeping the sort of realism there or keeping that flavor there, like we don't want to take that out. We want that there, and I'm sort of taking Tim's lead because Tim is. It's impossible to describe playing in one of Tim's games. Because the way he plays these characters, he plays them, even characters that are absolute villains or being a pain in the butt to the party or whatever, he plays them with such love. You can tell that he's got such empathy for them, even if they're trying to screw you up or whatever, that just having that to watch helps me in reading his stuff and interpreting it in a way that we're like, okay, so how do we frame this so that we're not going too far down the maybe offensive path, but yet staying true to the flavor of what we're trying to do, the setting. And so I'm trying to, like I say, I'm sort of taking Tim's lead there. And he's like, well, I think they should be able to play it in the ways that they want to play it. And I think we just need minimal direction in terms of maybe you want to avoid going down these paths because that way lies really stereotypical madness and sort of like it can become unfun real quick, even though at first it seems like a farce. Right. So in the words, in the books themselves, I mean, people are going to run it the way they want and play it the way they want no matter what we do. But in the books themselves, we're going to treat it with love and respect, knowing that it's okay to laugh at it sometimes, and even the Appalachians themselves laugh at themselves sometimes, and that's okay. That's part of it. That's part of the setting. I don't know if that answers the question, but it
does.
That's what I'm looking at, right?
It's interesting. I look at this setting with a lot of love because I have an aunt that literally has family that lives in caves in West Virginia. It's a thing. And when you call her a hillbilly, she is proud of it. And,
right.
Because it's with love.
It's tricky to handle that, like from outside looking in, from playing this
totally
as outsiders that we're not part of that culture. But just being with Tim and understanding where he's coming from helps me understand where that culture might be coming from and where we can and can't go. It helps me, right? Yeah,
very interesting stuff, and I look forward to one of those classic. Proofing passes to see what you guys did. One of those things where we pass the book around Pinnacle toward the end of the process. I can't wait to get to that point to see where it's at. Tim, now that you're looking at the camera, I'm going to guess that you're ready with a poem.
Yeah, this was about the last thing I wanted to do today, Ron. But for Chris Fox, I will do this. Investigations of a snapping turtle.
Okay. Yep.
My uncle delivered the snapping turtle as a present. He fetched it from near the dam at the coal-fired power plant where he worked. It was obscenely large, possessed of red eyes. It never retracted its head into its shell. Instead, it lorded around the yard, vaingloriously curious, hissing at our terrified cats. I fed it raw hamburger. I was warned repeatedly about its powerful jaws. If the turtle bit me, they said, it would not let go until it thundered. My grandfather wanted to make a stew out of it, the best stuff you can get, he said. One day the turtle clamped down on my finger. The pain was excruciating. The adults gathered round. "Law, you will have to wait until it thunders," my grandmother said, and they went inside. It turned out to be a drier than average June. The turtle and I sat in the yard for 16 days and nights. I prayed for death many times. The turtle seemed utterly content in its duty and applied a constant, unrelenting pressure. It never tried to take my finger, though I knew it could. When the beautiful afternoon darkening fell upon us, the first rumble of thunder was so distant that the turtle did not hear. But I knew the storm was getting closer, that it was only a matter of time. I looked into the turtle's eyes, red voids, distant time, evolution of scum and entrails. The next rumble was substantial, a quick fleck of lightning beyond the trees. The turtle released my finger. I felt no pain, but my finger was swollen, the size of a pine cone. "That's not a turtle we should eat," my grandpa said. "That's not a turtle I can take back to the river," my uncle said. The turtle transformed into a young woman with an untroubled face. "This is where folk ballads come from," she said, in the days before television, and started tying one of our chickens by its feet to the clothesline, preparing it for slaughter. "First this," my uncle said. "Next, the rapture," my grandmother said. Who would ever want to leave this place, I thought. But then I did.
Wow. Wow. That was really cool.
Yeah. Hey, Ron, can I jump in just for a second?
Sure.
What you saw there real quick is I've noticed that when he's doing podcasts, you get kind of a leveled out version of Tim. When I gamed with him at Genghis Khan, that was the Tim that I met running the Flash Gordon game right there. So to piggyback on what Tracy was saying, to interpret this game after you've seen Tim run it is incredible. And like I said, that is the Tim that I met at Genghis, and that's the Tim that ran the game. You've got to imagine him standing for the entire 4 hours, and the energy he puts out and the love he has for this game is just unbelievable. And you feel it in every word that he's written.
Yeah, that's the goal, is to keep that in the words themselves, right?
Yeah.
You can see the passion.
You've got to read the book with Tim's twang in your head. And when you get that, you get what the setting is.
Wait, can we have the first Pinnacle book with a released audio version?
Hey, I know a guy who's interested in doing audiobooks. Just saying. I can do all your editing, Tim. You just record it and sound great, and I'll take care of the rest.
Okay.
All right. So, next question. Jay asks, how is the supernatural presented in Holler? Is it hidden? More of an everybody knows kind of thing? Do the big boys have like their own men in black? It's a multi-part question there.
The big boys have their own kind of men in black, and it's based on sort of the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency, which is this historical group that coal operators in West Virginia use to keep folks in line. They bring in these detectives from the city, and they weren't really detectives. Lots of times they were just like mercenaries or, paid thugs. And so there's a version of that in the game, Kramer Holt agents. The way the supernatural comes in, like some folks believe in it more thoroughly than others. We have, there's a range from seer to doubting Thomas. But one of the things, like when I first started working on the game, it was like 90% labor conflict, 10% supernatural. And the more I started writing, it became more like 50-50. And I tried to take care to make sure that the supernatural elements of the game and the sort of the grittier real-life elements of the game reflected back on each other in interesting ways. I didn't want it to feel like I just dropped in these monsters from other settings, right, just to add, some combat or some flavor. I wanted to feel like the demons and the haints and the cryptids and the fae sort of rose out of the earth of the Holler, right? I mean, we know, like, monsters are always a reflection of a culture's anxieties, fears, zombies, like mass consumerism, vampires are energy drainers, werewolves, there's this monster trapped inside you that you're trying to control. And I wanted, like, the Holler monsters to feel like, oh, these are the perfect monsters for this setting. These are sort of the boogeyman that these people would imagine and that have then materialized. in the world. So I hope like the everyday gritty stuff and the supernatural stuff sort of speak to each other in a really nice sort of confluence and reflect back on each other.
Awesome. So I want to tell folks we do have time for one or two more questions.
I have a question for Tim.
Go for it.
I'm wondering how you found, writing. I mean, what was your experience writing for an RPG versus narratively as a story, right? Like how did you find that to be different, and what challenges did you find in doing that?
Yeah, well, probably the toughest part, and I'm glad I have very smart people like you and Chris and David and Clint and Daryl Hayhurst around who can help me with these things, Ron, Karl, all these folks. Edges and hindrances and setting rules and how not to turn the power too much up on the edges, not to make the hindrances too hard and crippling, which I sort of had a tendency to do with the hindrances, I feel like. But writing the adventures themselves, it wasn't a lot different because it's a form of storytelling where you stop and insert an opportunity to make a few rolls or to suggest game mechanics, that the narrative calls for. And I've tried to get it out of my head because I am so narratively oriented. I've tried to get this false binary between narrative and crunch out of my head because they should complement each other. And there's so much in the rules, like crunch creates narrative too, just as much as the dressing that the writer or the GM puts in the setting. I mean, there's no better narrative dramatic hinge than a critical failure or rolling 46 on your damage roll. That creates story, right? And so I've tried to sort of knock that out of my head and try to think about ways how the specific stories that I want to tell can conform to the rules. And that takes a lot of practice, and that's something I'm still working on, and I know I'm going to get help with. But that was the biggest thing, thinking about how the little story beats that I felt really comfortable with could conform to a mechanic that would express the story beat perfectly and then extend the story once it hits the table and becomes its own living thing.
Cool.
Excellent. So we have a Facebook question about Kickstarter. I'm just going to say the stance at this point is we're looking at 2021 for Holler. Hopefully Kickstarter and release, but you never know. I think 2020 has taught us not to plan too far in advance here. But let's get to the next. This is a two-part question because it's from two different people. It just happens to be completely perfectly meshed. Let's talk about the monsters in Holler. That came from Jim. And then I would like Tim Peter's question, which is what's your favorite cryptid that you've incorporated? So let's talk about monsters in general, and then you've got to pick your favorite one.
Okay.
As far as
there's
cryptids.
sort of four major categories. The human monsters might be the most menacing, the big boys and their minions. And
yep.
I also try to focus a lot on sort of like Southern Gothic, Appalachian Gothic tropes and rural eccentricity, where you're going to run into some strange folks out in the woods and in towns, and they'll be a huge sort of source of menace. And then when you get into the supernatural realm, there's really four major categories. Haints, which is another word for ghost, folks who have died, have passed on, have not completely passed on. Demons, which they range from like sort of grotesquely corporeal to completely incorporeal. There's a nice sort of range in terms of how demons are represented.
A nice
cryptids.
range. I love that.
It's a spectrum,
It's a nice range of demons.
Right. With cryptids, there's this toxic fog, which I haven't mentioned, called the blight, which is causes all sorts of mutations in the flora and fauna, and that's sort of my narrative explanation for where cryptids come from. And then there's an area called Feyfall that, to this point, is not affected by the blight, and which the big boys have not encroached upon yet, and it's full of really nasty, cunning, mischievous Fey. So cryptids, haints, Fey, and demon are the four major categories of monsters. Within the cryptids, there's like a hillbilly chupacabra hybrid called a billy cabra, That's just a pretty sort of fun, goofy monster. There's a Yehu or a Yahoo, which is our version of Bigfoot, and the degree of its human sentience is an open question. Like, if we kill that thing, are we killing somebody? Is that a thing or is that a somebody? Right? There's a version of the Mothman, like Landauer has the Bigfoot going on. There's a goat man, there's a sheep man, and with some of the cryptids, like sighting the cryptid can be like a harbinger. If you see it, it's so rare. You make a spirit roll, and depending on how that roll goes, and this is a rule that I've just been playing with when I play with people. You pick up a Benny, or you lose a Benny. Like, I saw the Mothman. Is that good news or bad news for me? Right? And you have to roll and sort of see which way the tides of fate are twisting. Or the barometer of fate, let's say.
So I see Solomon Kane on your bookshelf behind you there, Tim.
Yes.
But that said, what is your favorite Pinnacle setting?
Well, the first game I played was Flash Gordon with Scott Woodard and Daryl Hayhurst, and I just fell in love with it. I love the campiness of it. I love how fun it is. I mean, David was in my Flash Gordon game. I have about as much enthusiasm running Flash Gordon as I do when I run the Holler. A setting that I feel like doesn't get a lot of attention that I just think is fantastic is the Goon. And Matt Cutter wrote that book, and it's just brilliantly written. I love running the Goon. It has
drips with theme.
Yeah, some of the bee elements and pulpy elements that I really just have a blast running. So
very cool.
Yeah, that's what I usually run at conventions along with Holler, Flash Gordon, and the Goon.
So we are going to do something that maybe has never been done on a role-playing game panel, and we're going to end on time today.
Tim's got to go run a game.
Yeah, I have to. So I'm going into the Holler in 3 minutes.
Yep.
So I just want to say, I want to say thank you, first of all, to Chris for all the work that you and your team have done.
Oh yeah.
In making this happen.
Awesome.
Big thanks to Chris and Chelsea.
Definitely. I don't know what you're pointing at, David, but it's not Chris. On
my screen it is.
And of course, I want to thank those who popped in, being Karl and Jess, who just kind of came in and said hey to folks, taking the time for that.
Yeah.
David, I want to play in your game again, so hit me up.
We have
definitely
to make that happen. Yeah.
And of course, Tracey and especially Tim, thanks for being here and sharing this, especially Tim, sharing this world means a lot. I think, especially for folks once they get a hold of this. I guess I'm just going to say, I take my damn money. That's where I'm at.
Well, I'm excited. I feel so lucky to be working with, the folks at Pinnacle and to have this sort of platform for it, and just really appreciative to everyone who's supporting the game and giving it such good energy. I just feel super privileged and excited about it.
Excellent. All right, folks, have a great rest of your Hollerween. Stay safe, have fun, and we'll see you again soon. If you want to hear more, Tim, he was on a recent episode of The Peg Show. I know he was also on Savage Cast. And also check out Savage Interludes because I'm shameless.
Yeah, just cuss.
And the actual play is on Peg YouTube, the actual full 2-hour Arcane and Tracey and Jess. It was wonderful. And then we'll see you guys tomorrow at 1 p.m. for the wrap-up show. And that's really, we'll see you guys. Thanks for making a great Halloween, everybody.
Thank y'all.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.